Hi folks, my name's Sean Menard and I'm the founder of Municipal Advocacy Solutions. I hope everything's working well on the broadcast. It's the first time I'm doing a webinar for the business and wanted to test out this technology and have a different way of engaging with folks across the country who aren't able to normally engage with me. Hi folks, my name's Sean Menard and I'm the founder of Municipal Advocacy Solutions. I hope everything's working well on the broadcast. It's the first time I'm doing a webinar. So if there's a couple of glitches, let me know, but you can send me emails and let me know any questions you may have throughout the presentation. I'm going to be recording those questions and then hopefully answering them for you live at the end of the webinar. You can see my email address below, sean@municipaladvocacysolutions.ca. I'll also be monitoring the Twitter handle at Mooney_advocacy. So feel free to ask questions either way. I'm excited to be doing this today. We actually have representation from nearly every province and territory watching, which is fantastic. I'm going to get started. All right, so this is the presentation. There's about 12 slides. I imagine this will take about 15 to 20 minutes to go through the slides with you. And then at the end, I'll answer about 10 minutes of live questions. So do send your emails as we progress. So what we're going to be talking about today is an overview of Municipal Advocacy Solutions, how it began, the political environment in Ottawa, Federal Budget 2017, some of the most significant opportunities for municipalities, the ones that I really see as big opportunities, as well as ones that may not be for everybody. So for example, we have a lot of smaller municipalities watching today, in addition to a few larger ones, but mostly smaller municipalities. And those folks may not be able to access certain types of funding, and I'll go through that and be detailed about that. And at the end, I want to answer some questions for you folks, as I mentioned. All right, so MAS really began as I was working for FCM managing their government relations work. We'd have people coming to us to ask about funding opportunities and about engaging Ottawa, but our work was always focused more broadly on large-scale programs and policy changes. And so I recognized a gap that needed to be filled in the federal municipal world, and it's one which I wanted to fill. I think FCM plays a very, very valuable role in the country, and they do it well. But there's another aspect to this, and that's helping and assisting individual municipalities and individual clients to meet their targeted goals with the federal government. We really do four things. We assist municipalities in applying for funds. We know the players, the program criteria, what they're looking for. For municipalities who don't have the capacity to take this on regularly, we help fill that gap. We also help prepare municipalities to receive federal funding. This is the step before applications. So selecting the right projects that will fit into funding criteria, preparing a business case, ensuring council and staff agreement are as close to it as possible, and constantly monitoring opportunities, which is our strength. We also create written reports for municipalities. Nice packages, easy to read, and details how to prepare, timing of opportunities, and recommends which projects to apply for. And finally, we do direct advocacy on the Hill, engaging with ministers, MPs, bureaucrats to influence policy and decision-making for those individual municipalities. It really does pay dividends to make a visit to Ottawa or have somebody on the ground facilitating that, particularly on the staff side, I'll say, to arrange for these discussions. It just gets your foot in the door, and then you're able to continue discussing with those folks into the future. MPs, bureaucrats to influence policy and decision making for those individual municipalities. It really does pay dividends. All right. To make a visit to Ottawa or have somebody on the ground facilitating that. Some of the political environment in Ottawa. As you can see from the slide up there, that's the current standings in the House of Commons. Obviously, the Liberals have a majority government, and that majority actually carries through to seats in every single province except for Alberta and Saskatchewan. The rest are fairly Liberal dominated. There is a strong opposition with the Conservatives and a strong NDP presence as well that is able to hold the government to account, but you can see the political makeup just by looking at that slide in every different province and territory. It's also, I think, important to mention that the Liberals have really taken a different tact with infrastructure spending than the prior government. I'm going to get into some of that right now, but just in terms of this slide, oftentimes infrastructure flows to different ridings. Sometimes based on the MP in that riding and their influence. So it's important to engage your local MP, but also understand the environment in your province. And that may mean more advocacy or less advocacy depending on the type of representative that you may have. So the political environment in Ottawa, essentially what the Liberals, how they've approached municipalities has been very different, as I said. It's almost like a new deal. As you know, the New Deal that was orchestrated by Paul Martin and back in 2004 really had the gas tax fund come into play, had FCM funding through the Green Municipal Fund happen, new infrastructure dollars that were going to be more permanent. This changed the game for municipalities. And what we're seeing now with this new Liberal government is a new deal, really focusing on a new way of consulting, a new way of providing funding to municipalities that echoes a lot of what we saw back in 2004. What they're doing is simultaneous consultation on multiple different areas and strategies, from housing to recreation and culture, through to public transit and lots of green infrastructure funding. Sustainability and innovation have become two key hot topics that they've been talking about, but their simultaneous consultation has been prolific, really, across several different streams. There's a large big cities influence with this government. Certainly the Big City Mayors Caucus and the cities that have elected Liberal MPs have a lot of influence, but I do want to say, and I've met with several members of the Rural Caucus on the Liberal side, they're very strong as well. They have a lot of influence in terms of what the government's going to be doing for rural and northern communities. And the caucus is likely the strongest caucus in the Liberal government, the Rural Caucus is, outside of the province and territories, specifically caucuses. So there's a number of caucuses each party has. The Rural Caucus is quite powerful within the Liberal government. They're leveraging all orders of government. This is a proposal that actually came out of FCM back when the Conservatives were in power, about leveraging all orders of government, and the Liberals have really taken up that mantle. They haven't increased the gas tax fund at all. The gas tax fund is what it is. It is indexed by 2%, but it is that $2 billion fund. But what they have done is provided programs that see federal, provincial, and municipal contributions that go towards funding programs in almost every single aspect of what they've put forward. So that in itself is fairly new. The old Building Canada Fund did some of that, but generally this new government is really focused on every single aspect of federal funding being all orders of government that contribute. It's also been through government debt that they've set up a lot of these programs. So the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, for example, that's very much a government debt program. There is other debt that will be taken on based on the fact that each municipality must contribute at least 33% to these projects. In some cases it'll be less depending on how the provinces do in their bilateral agreements, but generally they're going to be taking on some debt to be able to access this new federal dollars and provincial dollars that go along with it. And a lot of it is back-end loaded. So the Conservatives had a bit of a back-end load program right before the election. And very much so is the case over the next 11 years. A lot of the funding is back end loaded. There's some up front in the next few years, but a lot of it comes in later years. Just a word about myself, being a former FCM manager of government relations, I was in the room when we actually negotiated the gas tax fund index, and in the room when we talked with each of the parties about their platforms in 2015. And so I know exactly where they were in terms of back-end loading or the gas tax fund or the GST rebate when they were negotiating those back then. So kind of interesting to see it all play out now. So what was delivered in Budget 2017? We saw a new national housing strategy that's going to be announced this fall. Significant amounts of new dollars for housing and renewal of old funding that existed. A new infrastructure bank that's supposed to get started by the end of 2017. Impact Canada Hub, so the Smart Cities Challenge. A hub was created in the budget implementation bill, and part of that is a Smart Cities Challenge. I'll get into the details about that later. Phase 2 infrastructure funding. So 5 main streams were allocated: rural and northern, public transit, green infrastructure, social infrastructure, and trade and transportation. The largest one being public transit by far, but there are several different aspects there. And they talked about negotiating bilateral agreements with the provinces and territories. They want to have these signed by March 2018. That means that they're actually meeting right now with these folks. There have been several meetings that I can confirm between the provinces, territories, and the federal government, not just the public ones, but other ones as well. And so I suspect a lot of them will be done before March of 2018. The agreements will be in place. The funding may not flow for some of these categories till after that. But as you'll see in the next slide, there's a lot of funding actually available right now that you don't have to wait for. So what are the federal opportunities for municipalities? As I mentioned, what's available right now versus what is coming in the future. So right now, you're going to see a gas tax fund bump very shortly, because these go up in $100 million increments based on 2% growth every year. As I mentioned, I was in there with the Minister of Finance and we negotiated with this 2% increase. So the gas tax is going to go up shortly. You're going to get a bump from that. The Enabling Accessibility Fund. This is an ongoing fund. It was reestablished and refunded in the last budget. And it is available right now. They do select intake, so you have to keep on top of it, which is what we do. But you know, if you have accessibility projects for municipal buildings in your area, this is the fund that you want to apply for. Rail Safety Improvement Program. This exists right now and has had the first 2 intakes. There is going to be another intake shortly, and that's going to be the bulk of the funding that happens for next year. So staying on top of that, but funding has flowed and it is available right now for rail safety improvement. That includes everything from the actual crossings themselves to safety signage. There's a lot of funding there, $20 million in 2017, 2018 alone. What else can you apply for right now? Obviously, the National Trade Corridors Fund was a new function of the last budget, in budget 2017, and they said we're going to be putting a portion of that funding, of that $10 billion, into National Trade Corridors Fund. So ports, airports, seaports, those sorts of things that will facilitate new trade. The first round of this has actually started, and the intake has happened. So September 5th was the deadline, and folks could apply to either be yay or nayed by the department on this one. But there will be further intakes in the future, and so again, something that can be applied for very shortly. The Green Municipal Fund, as folks know, through FCM, has existed for a long time, since back in the early 2000s, and it is available funding right now. The new Municipal Climate Innovation funding from FCM, both plans and studies and capital projects are now available. This was actually a leftover from the budget 2016 that existed, and now is available for funding for all municipalities that have climate innovation projects. And the final one at FCM is asset management. And so the Municipal Asset Management Program, there's a $50 million fund here. If folks need facilitation with their asset management plans or getting a plan in place, this is new funding that FCM had been asking for and was delivered, and now you can apply directly through FCM to receive this funding. The Cultural Spaces Fund. So this is a fund that was reestablished and again refunded in budget 2017, but it existed prior to, so many municipal folks will know about this already. But you can apply for this fund right now, and so there's $300 million that has been allocated over the next 10 years. The fund receives applications on an ongoing basis with requirements to apply through the regional office through Heritage Canada. And so it's something we keep track of and are able to facilitate those type of applications. Rental housing innovation, that's another fund that's available right now. It's to encourage new funding models and innovative building techniques in the rental housing sector. The $200 million fund is expected to help create up to 4,000 new affordable housing units, and it's available now to apply. And the final one that's available right now is the Rental Construction Financing Initiative. It provides lower cost loans to encourage the rental housing construction across Canada. It will provide up to $2.5 billion in loans over the next 4 years and is available through CMHC as we speak. The next slide is the exciting one. It's sort of what's coming next and how to prepare for it. So what's coming is the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund. This was newly announced in Budget 2017. It's going to help folks prepare for effects of climate change and to adapt to that climate change. So it is a back-end loaded fund, but there is funding available and coming shortly. And it goes along with sort of the National Disaster Mitigation Program that exists already, and along with other sort of green initiatives that the government has been putting forward, but it's a $2 billion fund. The Canadian Infrastructure Bank, I've already mentioned this one, but this is a large investment from the government. The proof's going to be in the pudding on this one. It's a $35 billion commitment from the government, $15 billion of which comes directly from public funds in those three main categories: green, social, and transit. But the other 20 is going to be capitalized, and so we're going to see how this works. This is really about, at the end of the day, government debt, municipal debt. If you're a small municipality, my recommendation is it's going to be difficult to apply for this fund unless you have several municipalities getting together. Say you're part of a region, and that region wants to have a project across several municipalities, and you want to have capital financing for it. You can potentially look at this, but I have to say I'm not as excited about this one. I think this one is more sort of classic public-private partnership sort of things that may not actually benefit municipalities a whole lot in the end. I think there's a lot more potential in a lot of the other funds that exist out there in terms of application programs or direct financing. The Smart Cities Challenge, this is interesting as well. There's actually a smaller one as well for smaller communities, but they've said they're going to get started this fall. And there's a large prize of $50 million. There's two other prizes for $10 million, and two smaller prizes of $5 million for small community and an Indigenous community. It sounds like what they're going to have is a two intake process. So first you have the initial idea and concept that you put forward, and then you get approval or not to go forward. And then secondly is the actual application itself. It's unclear how many municipalities would actually be funded at this stage. It seems like it's going to be few and far between. That said, I still think for a good application, this could be very, very lucrative for a city or community, just based on not only the funds you'll receive, but also the advertising you can do with your residents and making sure that you're profiling this sort of thing. So that is going to be available come the fall. And really, it's going to focus on what the states has done. If you Google Smart Cities Challenge United States, you'll see the type of projects that got funded down there, and gives you a good idea of what may be happening up here in Canada. The next one is the green infrastructure stream. And actually, sorry, I missed. Let me go back there. I missed the Rural and Northern Fund. That's a really big, important fund that I want to make sure I detail. That is a $2 billion fund, announced in budget 2017. This one is probably one of the only funds that exists now for road projects. So things like road access, bridges, expanding internet connectivity, potential for the renewal of energy systems in northern communities and rural communities. Lots of different options here. It sounds like they're going to be coming in this fund. I think they're going to try to be as flexible as possible when it comes to funding options for this fund. This is one that's not going to get going until the bilaterals are signed, so until likely March 2018 or a little bit before that. But there's a lot you could do to prepare for this type of funding. This one's interesting because the old Building Canada fund that existed funded all kinds of things: roads, bridges, a lot of stuff that would be in this category. But as people will know, the Building Canada Fund has been wound up. They're looking to stop all projects by March of 2018, and they accelerated that funding. Some provinces aren't even accepting municipal applications anymore. So, for example, if you're in Ontario, you're not even getting applications in on that fund. And a lot of other provinces have had difficulty, municipalities have had difficulty because their provinces won't submit their municipal projects. We don't like that. We like to make sure municipal governments are getting funded because we believe it strengthens those residents as much as possible. But that's been difficult on the BCF side. I think this is really meant to sort of take some of that funding application that existed before into the rural and northern $2 billion fund. We've got a lot more information on this fund if you're interested. I'm always open for a chat. Um, Along with that is reducing reliance on diesel. That's been a major theme in the budget. So, the Northern Reach program, the Arctic Energy Fund, reducing reliance on diesel. These are all funds that were announced recently or reestablished recently with new funding, like Northern Reach, and they want to see reductions of diesel into low energy projects. Public transit. So this is the big one. I mean that's the $21 billion fund over 11 years. It's going to be basically a transfer-based program, going to be based on ridership levels and provincial population. So 70% of the funding will go to provinces based on their ridership levels, and the other 30% will be based on the provincial population itself. There's lots of eligibility here for both new projects. That's the biggest eligibility is if you've got a new project, likely that'll be funded. But if you're just rehabilitating, they're capping that at 15% of the total fund. So, you know, I guess just plan for that if you've got public transit in your community of how to go about it. Likely new projects, new builds will be sought after. Some criteria the government's using here is shorten commute times, cutting air pollution, strengthening communities, and growing Canada's economy. So, just important to note. The green infrastructure stream, this is $9.2 billion allocated over the next 11 years. So, likely you're going to see a reestablishment of wastewater funding, a lot of safe water and drinking water, sewer, building better and cleaner connected electricity systems. The big question here is how much money is going to municipalities and how much money they're going to give to the provinces. They've said they're going to try to have a fairness sort of meter that they check up on, but that's been the big question. It's still not answered at this point. One thing I can answer is that the Low Carbon Economy Fund, which was $2 billion from budget 2016, was going to be accelerated over 2 years. It's now being pushed back further. But the nice thing is that at least $600 million of that $2 billion fund will be allocated to municipalities directly through a challenge-based function. So we now know that there is going to be funding there to help reduce national greenhouse gas emission targets. If you can show functionally you are reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we can get funding for that sort of thing. Recreation and culture funding. Again, I mentioned the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund. This is separate to that. This is more funding, the $1.3 billion. Again, it'll be through the bilateral agreements, and again, it'll go through the provinces and territories to receive the funding. But, you know, recreation like rinks, upgrading community facilities, energy usage, new builds, all of those things will be eligible within this category when it comes. So the time to start preparing for that stuff is now, getting your projects sorted, and I'll go through how to do that in a moment. And finally, housing and homelessness. The government's going to be creating a new national housing fund along with a new national housing strategy. It's been a long wait for this strategy. I'm glad the government is committed to this. They've done a fantastic job of talking about this, and I think they're going to follow through in this fall. That's when we should see the national housing strategy. So that'll consist of, through the National Housing Fund, the Co-Investment Fund, the Affordable Rental Housing Financing Initiative, lots of different capital contributions and innovation. They're going to preserve the affordability of social housing to maintain a lot of those rent geared to income units, as well as a sector transformation fund, which is going to have technical assistance, tools, and resources pooled together through CMHC. So watch for this coming up. There's a lot of funding there. If you're in Ontario, for example, a lot of that's been downloaded to municipalities. There's going to be direct funding opportunities. And if you're not in Ontario, they are funding municipalities for this fund. One of the other things I wanted to mention is around homelessness and the investment in affordable housing. The investment in affordable housing continues up until 2019, but it is going to be replaced after that through this new national housing strategy. And the homelessness partnering strategy, which has been a very successful program for 65 different municipalities, has started to expand their criteria and allow for different other municipalities to apply for it. There is new funding there as well that does a fantastic job through things like Housing First. And then Northern Housing, there's a $300 million fund that's been committed to for Northern Housing, so stable and predictable funding to territorial governments and those municipalities within those territories. That's going to help approximately 3,000 Northern families find adequate, suitable, and affordable housing. All right, so I've taken up more time than I thought, but I do want to make sure I mention a few other things. There are other funds as well that people can apply for right now. So funding for seniors in municipalities, disability funding within cities and communities, a career focus for youth in municipalities, and disaster mitigation. So beyond the new disaster mitigation funding, there's old disaster mitigation funding under the Conservatives that still exists that you apply for through your regional office of your province and territory. And that's due, I believe, in the end of October. And so, there's other funds available here, many other funds that are available that we keep track of on a regular basis, help facilitate the application for, and make sure that cities and communities are putting their best foot forward to get this. The last slide I'll go through before answering if you've had any questions that have come in, I'll have to check that briefly, is around what should municipalities do to prepare? So what should you actually do to get ready for this? Well, there's several criteria that's actually being set right now. So stuff that the government wants you to implement. So things like increasing the rate of economic growth, but in a sustainable way, improving environmental qualities, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improving the mobility of Canadians and communities, making communities more inclusive and accessible, and building infrastructure in a sustainable way. If you can prove sort of those 5 baseline criteria, your chances of success go up by quite a lot. And so we make sure to monitor that. A lot of the criteria the provinces and territories will set up will be based on those 5 things I just mentioned. And so, making sure the criteria is set. Making sure your council and staff are aligned. So having the council and staff discuss these projects, approve these projects in advance, but making sure you're aligned with the criteria in advance and having projects in the pipeline sort of shovel ready. You don't have to have everything ready. This is an 11-year program, so it's a long program. But if you've got a couple of projects ready to go, that doesn't hurt. As I mentioned, project selection is going to be very important. Application content. So there's just certain buzzwords and things they want to hear in the application. They want to make sure that you're really doing a good job with the design work, etc. Make sure you don't have shovels in the ground already. That's important too. But make sure your application is, as engineered as possible. And again, those are things that MAS tracks and make sure are in the content to give you your best chance of receiving federal funding. And finally, timing is critical. There are some funds that are available right now. And so if you need applications right away, there are certainly funds available that I went through already, but also preparing for that sort of March deadline and the back-end loaded stuff. So, heading into the election in 2019 and after that, there's a lot of funding potential that municipalities would do well to get ready for. So you may want to stage out in your asset management plans. Well, here's something we can apply for in the future. We know it's going to be available, and a lot of money's coming in 2020, for example. Let's stage that out and apply for something different. I also recommend applying for several different things at once. It doesn't make sense to me to only apply for one thing and focus on that. I do recommend applying for several different funds all at once if you can. Okay, so that comes to the end of the slide transition here. I do want to just go back and see if there was any questions that came in, so give me a moment here. All right, so we do have one question that has come in, and it's just about sort of what's the latest intelligence that you have from the Hill? Well, it's a broad question. I'm on the Hill a lot, and with bureaucrats and MPs a lot. I guess the biggest thing I could tell you is that, the feds have met with a lot of the provinces and territories already. That stuff should be getting going very soon. In terms of the amount of money that you should be prepared to commit, I'm hearing in the neighborhood of about 30% on any given project. So to prepare for your funding in the neighborhood of 30%, the provinces and territories are expected to kick in at least 33%, and the feds have said up to 40%. So if you prepare for at least 30%, you should be good. Their eligibility size thresholds are still being decided. So for smaller municipalities, how they can apply. It's not necessarily just going to be 100,000 and lower. They may actually have different criteria for each. So say 30 and lower, 100 and lower. So that's something to keep an eye on. And I guess another piece of intelligence is around sort of incrementality. So it's not going to be as stringent as it was in phase 1. So that means that the government's going to be using a concept of displacement, so that it's more plan based, and reviews will take place based on that. Not to say that if a municipality has something in their plans later on that can't be funded, those are things that will be funded, and it's going to be less stringent than saying, oh, hey, this would have been done anyway. No, you can actually work it to say, hey, the timeline's been moved up because of this new funding, and they're going to be less stringent on that aspect. So I wouldn't worry so much about that unless you've got shovels in the ground, of course. Okay, a couple other questions. Are the feds looking to allow stacking for grants? Any discussion on this? Great question. I had a great question about stacking. So each program is different, but in general, yes, you can stack on certain programs up to a certain amount. So for example, let's say you apply for disaster mitigation funding at 50%, which they fund up to. You could stack that with other FCM funding, no problem. And FCM will fund, an extra amount of that up to 100%. So I recommend using FCM funding when you can to stacking. Using your gas tax fund, for example, in addition to some of the other application-based funds certainly is wise, but there will be stacking limitations depending on the fund. It's a broad question, and so up to 40% the government has said for many of these funds, and you wouldn't be able to use much more than that. So certainly stacking will come into it depending on the fund. I can have another conversation with you offline about that. And I think that is the majority of the questions so far. Oh, it looks like there's one on Twitter that maybe came in. It says, Sean, there does not seem to be much for recreation enhancements. Thoughts on new sports fields, playgrounds? So, there is the $1.3 billion fund on recreation. That's coming in March. Right now, it's very few and far between for recreation. But there is $1.3 billion coming. Again, that has to be spread out across the country, and they're expecting provinces and territories to match that. I can tell you in Ontario, I think they're going to get that rolled out very, very soon. There's an election in Ontario, as folks know, in June, and so I think they're going to roll out recreation funding as soon as possible. It looks great for the government, so I'd prepare for that coming very, very soon, and a big chunk of it coming very early if you're looking for recreation funding. That's a great question, and again, I can go through more detail with you offline. There will be recreation funding coming. Another question as well, are private investors in the Canadian Infrastructure Bank still forecasting a 7 to 9% return on infrastructure projects, or have assumptions shifted during the bank setup? Well, the Minister of Infrastructure is the one responsible for the bank. I've just recently spoken to their office. I haven't heard any indications about them changing the initial assumptions that were in the budget implementation bill, and the expectations around a sort of 7 to 9% feedback loop. Again, I mean, if they're expecting that type of return, the municipal projects that'll be eligible for that sort of thing is going to be few and far between. It's going to be very difficult to work on capitalizing that bank. So I haven't heard anything different, but that's going to be a tough target to meet, in my view, through municipal projects. Okay, another quick question here. Can you tell me if there are any funding opportunities coming down the pipe for landfill closure and remediation? Certainly within the environment funding, if you're able to show a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and remediation of some of the lands that you have, yes, there will be funding. I've just recently talked to the Minister of Infrastructure's office, and they've committed to remediation of lands that are brownfields. So within the green infrastructure stream, there's a few different streams in there. Brownfield remediation is expected to be one of those streams. How much and how to do it. But the priority that used to be contained in the Building Canada Fund, I've heard, is going to be in the new green infrastructure stream. So yes, prepare for that type of funding. You need to tie it to something, though. If you're just saying, oh, we're remediating for the sake of private development on the lands, that's not going to be a go for this minister. But if you're saying, hey, we're going to tie that to affordable housing, or we're going to tie it to a public project that helps get transit and walkability, accessibility through, certainly that's the type of funding that'll come forward. All right, just quick check on any other questions. It doesn't look like it, and I think I've taken more time than I expected here. So I guess I'll just leave you, with one quick thought. If you're thinking about utilizing a service such as ours to help facilitate your applications, I think it's a smart thing to consider. I started this business with the belief that municipalities are the most important order of government in the country, and I still believe that. We work solely for municipal governments and organizations and those who work with municipalities. We offer very low costs to do that as well. So if you're looking just to spend, $1,000, $2,000 on something to try to get a leg up on your application, we certainly help with that and have had great success with both small and large municipalities, both through applications and also on the Hill in getting achievements accomplished. And so, I'd really, if you want a leg up, if you want an advantage, for the 40 people, 30, 40 people that are watching right now, if you want an advantage that doesn't cost a lot and you're able to, really lower your risk when applying, we can do that for you and help you achieve those outcomes that you're looking for. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this page. Please do follow us on Twitter, and please email me. If you have individual questions, email me questions about anything. I love to talk, or call me. I love to chat. So thanks so much for watching today, and all the best in your future endeavors in working with the federal government. Take care.